Hello and welcome to episode 97 of Tom's Hirschsprung's podcast. I am delighted to welcome Donna Broughton to the show. Welcome, Donna.
Hello.
Um, we are going to chat about something a little bit different when it comes to Hirschsprung. So this isn't necessarily one of the sort of I don't want to say normal stories, not normal story, but we're going to chat about a lot about genetics, which as people who've listened to this show for a while know that I'm fascinated by genetics, by, how did we all come to have Hirschsprungs? How did we all come to have Hirschsprungs in the family? And we are going to chat a little bit about genetics. So up to you really where you'd like to start from.
Yeah. So I can just start from kind of the beginning of our genetics story in relation to Hirschsprungs. So really, it started before me. Well, my husband and his family, and he already knew that Hirschsprung's was kind of passing down in his family as his grandfather had it, his eldest brother had it, some cousins had it. It's got quite his family's kind of hard to figure out sometimes. So we know there's odd people within the family that do have Hirschsprungs, and they all were being born with the same kind of Hirschsprungs, which is like the um, the long stem. Is it
Yeah.
long?
Long
Yeah,
segment.
long segment. That's the word I
Yeah.
was thinking was LS. The long segment type of Hirschsprung. So, um, and from way back when, like when his brother was born many years ago, it was very different to when my husband's eldest son, who he had with his previous partner, was born. Things had moved on massively, but still, it was identified at birth and had to have the pull-through operation at the time of birth and that kind of thing. So it was very much the same for each person in the family, which suggests obviously that it's genetic. And I think, like I've said before, we know it's not for everybody, not genetic for everybody. Some people have no idea what causes it, but it was very obvious within his family that it was genetic. And so we knew that my husband obviously had the gene mutation, but he doesn't have Hirschsprung's, but then his son did. And so it was coming down his father's line as well. We knew that from his grandfather and that kind of thing. So when we were kind of ready to have a child together, um, it was something that we thought about, and whether it's something that we could, I say avoid, but
I know what
if
you
we were
mean.
going
Yeah.
to have a child, we wanted to give them the best kind of chance of not having Hirschsprungs if we could help it, because it's very obvious it was passing down. And also, there was a part of us that really wanted to kind of try and stop it being passed down if we could within our family line. So we went to see a geneticist quite early on, really, before we even really said we're ready to have a baby. It was kind of in the back of our mind that actually let's start to investigate this now, so that when we are, it's there. So we started. It was quite a long process, really, but we went to see a geneticist, and they said, yeah, it's very obvious. It's in your family. We can track this across a family tree. And they said, we don't know really which gene it's in. What's the most? They kind of had an idea of a common gene that it would be in, but I think with Hirschsprung's, they don't necessarily know where that mutation is necessarily, and it can be different for different people. But they said that they would be willing to have a look for us because it was so prominent across the family at testing the family and seeing if it was in that most common gene, which is the Rett gene, and then go from there, really. Um, so they invested a bit of money into that, which was really good. And they took family members and tested their blood, and then they came back to us and said, "Yep, we've found it. The mutation is in that Rett gene," which then meant that it it gave us options then going forward. They were able to give us options. But one of the things that I suppose I'd heard about something that actually instigated all this. I worked with somebody whose son and daughter-in-law, one of them had a condition that was genetic, and they were going through a process to have a baby that at the time was called PGD. And I should find out what that stands for actually, because I've forgotten already. But so that was pre-implantation genetic testing. So it's kind of like IVF, but they test the embryos for the gene before they put them back in. So I'd heard about somebody having this, and so I started to do a little bit of research online, and that's kind of when I found out that actually for Hirschsprung's there's no real kind of idea of what gene it's in, and it'd be really difficult to do that. So once they were able to confirm the gene, that became an option for us, and they said to us, look, there's several ways you can have a baby. You can just go ahead and try and just go for it and decide and not worry about it and hope one way or the other. You can get pregnant and then test, do a blood test, I think it was, they could do from the mother to test if the gene was in the blood, because with me not having the gene, if the baby had it, it would show up, and then you could decide from there what you wanted to do. Or there was at the time the PGD, and it's got a different name now, but it's still basically a very similar thing. So we did decide to go down that route and go on a waiting list for that, which was about a year at the time, because they're doing it for lots of other genetic conditions. But what was interesting as well, and what took a lot of the time, is that no one had ever done it before for Hirschsprung, so it wasn't even licensed at that time. So we had to wait for the license to go through. So we kind of instigated that, getting the license through for that, so that people in future can go ahead and have the same treatment if they want to, and if it's genetic. And so, yeah, that was all licensed. And then we were set to go, really. So there was a few places that did it, but the main place, this was on the NHS as well at the time, which was really good. And we were offered the actual PGD treatment through the NHS, because so it's like IVF, but different in that IVF is kind of set locally, and people who perhaps can't conceive naturally get like one round, or what they get set rounds, or depending on the area that they live in, and it's very different. At the time that we had it, and I couldn't say what it's like now without researching it, but at the time that we had it, it was set across the country by NHS England, and it was quite generous in that you could have 3 rounds, because the way that they saw it was that actually by them investing in people having this genetic testing, it would save the NHS in the future a lot of money, because they're not treating people and babies with genetic disorders when they're born. So we were really fortunate, and it was with Guy's St Thomas in London, but we live in Sheffield, and their satellite clinic was in Sheffield, so we were able to do a lot of the treatment in Sheffield and then travel to London for some of the main treatment. So that's kind of like the gist of how we got there. And then obviously there's the actual treatment side, which I'm happy to talk about what happened there and what it resulted in, if that's what you want to know
Yeah,
more about.
absolutely. I mean, it's a fascinating. I mean, that's why I really wanted to chat to you about this, because I talk to people a lot about genetics and about, what's passed down and what isn't, and how this will happen and how that will happen. And I do have people who say to me, like, I want the gene to, stop with me, or to stop with my daughter or my son. And as much as, on this show and on other podcasts I've done, I highlight, the sort of positives, I guess, around people who have Hirschsprungs and the careers they have and all of that stuff. Obviously, having Hirschsprungs comes with a whole dose of surgeries, medications. So in essence, would you choose to have it? Well, no. Like, it's so if you can stop it, I mean, I guess why wouldn't you?
Yeah. And I know, and I think I said, I know for some people it might sit a bit uncomfortably because it is that kind of playing God. And I know some people think that. But for any kind of genetic disorder, I think there's people having this for genes that cause cancer. If you can recognize that and help your future children and generations, then for me it was a no brainer. I didn't even give it a second thought. I just went into it and thought, if I'm going to have a child, this is how I want to do it. I mean, there was still that. I think it's 99% accurate. There was still that chance, but yeah, I mean, as well. So we did have a daughter successfully through the process, um, and just to know that she's not going to have to think about that because we've known for so long. Everybody in the family has always known that it's a chance. Every time they're pregnant, it's a chance. There's a chance there that the baby could be born with it. And I know for myself, when I was pregnant, there was that 1% chance, but that's minimal to know that actually I've done all I can to prevent this, and it just made our pregnancy a lot more enjoyable because we weren't worrying about, oh, when the baby's born, is is it going to have to have surgery when within like a matter of days of being born? Is it going to struggle? I know that my husband went through quite a lot with my stepson when he was born and having surgeries, and he was in intensive care for a few weeks, and all the things they had to do at home to try and get him back on track. And ultimately, when he was a little bit older, he did end up having a colostomy bag, which he lives perfectly happily with now. He's nearly 21, and they've said, oh, maybe you'll want to reverse it one day, but no, this is his life now, and he's really happy how he lives compared to when he was younger and he was suffering a lot. And like I said before, I saw him suffer quite a bit when he was little, and the pain that he went through, and him being, as he got older, he ended up in intensive care on occasions. And if you can take that away from your future children and grandchildren, then you do all you can, don't you, to do that. And
Of course.
I just
Well,
think it's one of those things that some people who are listening or who have had children with Hirschsprungs, or who know it's perhaps in their family or it's something they're investigating, whether it is genetic, I know that one of the things they might be thinking is, if I have another baby, is it going to happen again? Are we going to have multiple children? What's the chances? What's the risks? And I just think raising awareness of, actually, if it is genetic, there is an option, that there is a way you can have another baby without having to have that in your mind all the time.
yeah, definitely. And I think as well, when I speak to a lot of parents, and they've had always differing um, answers to questions. So when some parents have said to doctors, there's Hirschsprungs in my family, will my child have Hirschsprungs? Some are told, it's possible, and some are told no. I mean, I've had people who have Hirschsprungs, and then they have a child or are pregnant with a child, and the doctor said, "Oh well, no, it's a really really small chance. It's not going to happen." Which I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I'd say that that advice is a little bit worrying because as soon as you say something's not going to happen or it is going to happen, people will take that. They'll take that and take that as truth. So I think kind of I guess in this situation, knowledge is power, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think as well, it's not necessarily about me raising awareness and saying, look, if you want to have another child, or whatever, there's this route you can go down. But essentially it's IVF. Is
Yes.
what I mean. I can go into the details more if you want, but
Sure.
It's more about that people knowing that actually you can go to a geneticist if you think that it's in the family and push for some kind of testing to find out if I mean, like I said, in some cases they don't know what gene the mutation is in that causes it, but there is the common gene, which is the Rett gene, and it's about you can go to geneticists and talk to them about that, because I think a lot of doctors, when you talk about Hirschsprung's, a lot of them don't actually know what it is,
No.
or they know very little about it. I know when I was pregnant and I was talking to doctors about it, and because they were asking why I'd had IVF, and the the changes, the way that meant that I had to be treated during my pregnancy, and different things like that. And I told them why. They were just like, well, what's Hirschsprung's? So then I had to go into detail about that, and then they were just like, oh, right, well, we'll just make sure there's a baby doctor there when you're born to check the baby to make sure they haven't got Hirschsprung's. I was like, yeah, but we'll know before the doctor knows, probably, because we know what we're looking for, and that doctor's probably never seen a case of it, or it's very rare that they have. So I think a lot of it is doctors might say that, and I know that my husband, when he first went to see a geneticist with his previous partner, they were very much like that, and they didn't know as much then. They were like, oh, the chances of you having a baby are very slim, of having a baby with it,
Yeah, yeah.
are very slim. What he didn't know is he actually had the genetic mutation, and then his son would get it, and he would have Hirschsprung's. But yeah, I think even for people not thinking about having children in the way that we had our daughter, it's just that if they want to know if it's genetic, or there's a kind of an inkling that it is because they're seeing sporadic cases of it within the family, just go into a geneticist and push in to say, look, we know that it can be genetic, and it's something that's concerning us, and we want to know.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right with that, and I think you're right as well. And again, this is not a knock at GPs or doctors or whatever, because I know there are hundreds of thousands of conditions, and you can't be an expert in all of them.
Yeah,
You know, I totally understand that, and I know that in terms of Hirschsprung's, having spoken to doctors and nurses, you do, you know, if you're lucky, you might do one seminar where they might say, "Oh, and there's this thing called Hirschsprung's,
yeah,
and this is what to," you know. Are you going to remember that out of 7 years of training? Probably not. So it is it is a tricky one, because lots of GPs won't just won't know what it is, you know, and will. And I have seen GPs as well when I've been there, and I say, "Oh, I've got Hirschsprung's," and then you can see them quickly Googling the word Hirschsprung's, and they go, "Ah, yes, yes, it's blah blah blah." It's like, you've just Googled that. You don't know what that is.
and you
I
don't know
saw
really
you Google
how
it.
to deal with it, or what implications that has on anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I just, yeah, I saw you typing in the word Hirschsprung's. Don't kid me that you know what it
and
is.
Google had to correct the spelling for you as well at the same
Yeah, yeah,
time.
exactly, exactly. And mind you, probably nowadays it'd be Chat GPT. I mean, God knows what you'll end up with there. But yeah, and it's so it's not, and it will never be a commonly known condition, you know, just because of the rarity that it has. But yeah, it's, and I guess I have spoken to quite a few people who are constantly thinking about genetics and do want to know more, which is why I really wanted to chat to you, because I thought actually the more people are aware of, again, like you said, the options that are out there, because I'm not sure that I don't know, but I'm not sure that everybody may be aware of all of the options. And if they don't want that particular option, then that's absolutely fine. We're not saying you
Yeah,
have
of
to take this,
course,
you have
yeah.
to take that. People do whatever they want, but I think it's one of those things where giving people the choices is the best way to say, right, there's this and this, and you can choose, you know, whichever path you want to go down, rather than saying this is the only way of doing things, if I've got that
Yeah,
right.
yeah. No, exactly. And I think I just know from speaking to people that it's just a concern when they've had a child with it. I know, I know a friend of mine. Um, she was worried then about having another baby because she was like, "I'm so on edge to do it again because I just don't know if the baby's gonna have it, and I don't know if it's genetic or not genetic, and even though there's no other cases in the family, we don't know everybody in the family,
Yeah.
and it's just, yeah, there's a lot to it, but yeah, like you say, it's just that it is an option. It
Yeah.
is an option to find out, and especially, I know, like I say, a lot will say, "Oh, well, we don't know which gene causes it," but they said to us there's a common gene, which is where we'll try first. And if it's not in that gene, then we'll have to think about what we do next. But we were very fortunate that they tried the common gene, which is the RET gene, and that mutation was in there. And yeah, so we were able to then move on to the next stage. But also what it did as a separate aside from that, doing that bit before we even moved on to having a baby and all that side of things, was that it meant that because we'd gone to the geneticist and set that ball rolling to find which gene it's in within our family history, so to speak, that then it opened so much more for our family because um, so like my stepson, he's got a younger brother who hasn't got Hirschsprung's. He can now go and ask to be tested to check whether he's got the gene, so that when he's ready for children, he can make the right decision for him and his partner at the time. I've got nieces and nephews, a brother-in-law who doesn't know if they have the gene or not. They've just not got Hirschsprung's. But like my husband, they could have the gene. They can go to the geneticist that we saw now and say, test me, and they can look in that gene and go, yeah, you've got it, or no, you haven't. And again, it's just like a worry lifted, isn't it, for them as a family to know when I'm ready to have children, it's not something I have to consider, or, well, I'm armed with, obviously it's up to them, like anybody, whether you get tested for any genetic mutation, but if they want to be armed with that information, they can go and find that out now and decide what they want to do with that information when they're older or the time comes for them to have children or anything like that. So there's that side of it, what it's done for the family, and then there's obviously the help that it gave us then to have a child that didn't have the gene.
Yeah. And I love the fact as well that, and you said you touched on earlier about how you needed to get a license for it, and so that presumably would have meant you the first people who looked at this for.
As far as I know, unless somebody was doing it for the same disorder at the same time in parallel, and it just so happened that it got, and and I was part of a lot of groups at the time, like Facebook groups for guys in St Thomas PGD and other PGD groups, as you do, to find people who were going through the same thing as you and going through the same treatment. And I didn't come across anybody that was going through it, that was having the PGD treatment for Hirschsprung's. So it leads me to believe we're potentially the first couple in the UK to go down that route for Hirschsprung's disease. But I'd love to hear from anyone else that has done the same. It'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a lot of there's yeah, there's quite a few sort of Facebook groups. There's sort of the main UK one, and then there's lots that's sort of around the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't tend to look at them too often because they're just full of information,
Yeah.
although full of questions that I can't answer, and it's really difficult to kind of sift through things, and so I don't. I maybe take a if I get a notification about it, I'll quickly glance at it, but generally I tend to leave them alone because they're just full of it, full of questions that
Yeah.
I just can't answer. Um, but there is quite a lot of discussion I do see on there about genetics and about does anybody know this and does anybody know that? And I think it's. I mean, of course, some people don't want to know. Just in the same
Yeah,
way that some people don't want to know whether they're having a boy or a girl.
yeah,
And then that sort of, but I think some people do, and that is absolutely fine. And I think I probably will stress this as well. I may have said it before, but this seems to me as very much an individual thing, like as in everybody very much free to make their own choice without saying you've got to do this or you've got to do that or whatever. In the same way that I speak to people who they have a Hirschsprung's child and they say we don't want any more children, but then I've spoken to people who've had a Hirschsprung's child and then have gone on to have more children because they want to have more children.
yeah,
So I think all of this is very individual. Would you agree?
definitely. 100%. And like I think I said previously, I know this kind of treatment itself can be quite contentious because essentially you're selecting which embryo goes back into not to the point where, I mean, there's a lot of rules around it, so I'm not saying I specifically said I wanted a girl embryo put back in, but so in terms of how the treatment worked, once they knew which gene which where the genetic mutation is, they were then able to build some kind of test, which meant that when they went through the IVF process of taking the eggs and the putting together the sperm and creating the embryo, they were then able to take a biopsy from each embryo that they'd created, freeze those embryos so that they were like on ice, so to speak. And then once they've got the biopsy, they used the test that they built to test each embryo for the genetic mutation. So then they were able to say to us, right, you've got this many that don't have the genetic mutation, this many that do. And I mean, I think that's where it can sometimes be a bit contentious. Anyway, IVF can be, I suppose, in general, because it's a bit then like, oh, so then what? So you've just dismissed a group of embryos that had the genetic mutation. But for
It's what
me,
it is.
it
Yeah,
was
it is what
it
it is.
was just about, I suppose it depends how you look at IVF in general, because with any IVF treatment, there's a group of embryos, isn't there, potentially that don't get used,
Yeah,
depending how many children you want and how successful you are. So yeah, we were. It took a couple of rounds, but we were quite fortunate to get quite a lot in one of our rounds that didn't have the genetic mutation, and then they were able to put one of those back in, which is our daughter, which we were very fortunate with. And I was, like I say, it took the pressure off of the pregnancy a bit. I felt like I could enjoy the pregnancy. Okay, at the back of my mind, there was a bit like there's a 1% chance that they didn't find the right gene or whatever. But kind of what did give me a bit of comfort in that is that they did find in a group of the embryos, they did find the genetic mutation in some of the embryos. So that kind of to me said, yeah, the test is working, and also gave me comfort that I had probably done the right thing, because evidently we could quite easily have created a baby that did have the genetic mutation. Like I said, I've no idea. Nobody really can tell us what the chances are of them then developing Hirschsprung's. But yeah, it did take that pressure off. And then, but when she was born, there was a little bit of me that was waiting for that first poo as well. So,
yeah, yeah.
so
I think any anybody involved in Hirschsprung's knows exactly what you mean by that, because it's one of those where, and I know we talked a little bit about off air about it, about a relative of yours,
yeah,
um, and when we talk about has the baby pooed, and to 99% of parents, they'll that will just happen,
yeah,
just probably over 99%.
yeah,
Um, it will just happen and you don't need to think about it. but as parents with Hirschsprungs in the family, you know exactly what that's like.
Yeah. I
And
think I texted because my husband had gone home when I'd eventually, like when I'd had him, I was like, go home, get some sleep. And I was just in the hospital with her. I remember texting him and being like, she's done the poo. She's done the first poo. We're all right.
see, to anybody else, that message would just mean like
Yeah.
it would be really really odd. It just wouldn't like they wouldn't quite get it. But Hirschsprung's parents they they understand. They
Yeah.
understand just how important that is,
Yeah.
and the past the meconium and all of this that
Yeah.
and the other. And the other point I know you made a little bit while ago with the genetic testing is that specific the testing for Hirschsprung's is NHS funded, which I thought is fantastic.
Yeah. So it's not specifically for Hirschsprungs,
Oh
but
yeah,
so the actual genetic side of it and finding the gene, that was NHS funded for us because we went and spoke to our geneticist on the NHS, got a referral through GP and said we want to talk to a geneticist about this. We explained the family tree. We explained that we were trying to plan for our future and our future family. And they looked at the family tree and said, well, yeah, it's very evident that it is in your family. So we were very fortunate that at that time they said, yeah, we're going to try and find which gene it's in, and we got like my partner's dad to come in. They took blood from him, my stepson, and then his my husband, not partner, his mom, because she didn't have the gene, so they had that to test. So they took loads of blood and was able to test it all and compare it. And they were able to say then, yeah, we've definitely found which gene it's in. It's consistent in because his dad didn't have Hirschsprung, but the same as my husband, obviously had the gene because his eldest son had it, my husband's brother. So yeah, so that we were very fortunate that they developed all that on. They did all that on the NHS. But I think in general, if you can talk to a geneticist about testing on the NHS anyway. But yeah, the PGD side of it for any genetic, if you were having the IVF with PGD for a genetic reason at the time, that was on the NHS for the 3 rounds was just set by NHS England at the time, for anybody who had a genetic. I mean, there were like IVF is there were certain conditions, like it had to be your first. I think at the time it was your first child together that didn't have the genetic condition. So if you had a child with the genetic condition already together, you could go on to have that to make sure your second child didn't have it, or it was just your first child in general together. So yeah, I don't know what the rules are now, because so I'm talking about we first went into this and kind of the genetic exploration in around 2014, and we went through the process of the PGD in like 2018, 2019, and then my daughter was born in 2020. So it's changed a little bit. So I'm not sure on the funding. I think some of it's still covered on the NHS, but it's changed name now to PGTN from PGD, which is it's the same process. They've just called it a different name. So, but definitely I'd say to people who are interested in it, see their GP about that referral to a geneticist and bring that up with the geneticist. And it was the geneticist that then referred us to Guy's and St Thomas in London and said there's this couple who would like to go down this PGD route. We've identified where the gene is, blah blah blah. And then we then went into that separate waiting list and then building the test. And well, they had to license Hirschsprung's first as something that you could have IVF for, and then building the tests and all that. But yeah, we just started with our GP and got referred to the geneticist, and then asked them to refer us in for PGD. And it was a long journey, and I'm sure it's probably longer now as people have got more and more aware of it. I'd love to know if anyone else has ever had it for Hirschsprung's, but for other conditions, people are becoming more and more aware of it. So I know that it's quite, I don't know if popular is the right word,
Yeah,
but
I know what
as
you mean.
people become
More
more
common.
aware,
Yeah,
yeah, people are accessing the service a lot
yeah,
more frequently is probably the right way to say it. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, it's just, for me, it's just it's one of the best things I did, really, because it's hard work, as IVF is. Had my ups and downs, but the outcome is that I've got a daughter who doesn't have Hirschsprung's disease and won't have to worry now about passing that down to any future children she has. So
yeah, most
yeah,
definitely. And I think I can't claim to be anywhere near an expert in this. I have very little understanding of how any of this works. Hence why I really wanted to chat to you, because I wanted, I guess, like a lot of people who listen to this podcast, they just want to know more and
yeah,
know, what options are out there, and how all of this works. And in terms of time, I know you gave some years there, but in terms of time from sort of start of process to end of process, how long did it all sort of take?
yeah. So we first went to see our GP for the referral to the geneticist in 2014,
Yeah.
and I think we were a couple of years for sure going through that, kind of seeing the geneticist, trying to figure out the gene, going back to see the geneticist, talking about our options. We were a couple of years doing that. And then we got referred into the PGD waiting list. So we didn't actually start. They then took about a year to license it, build the test, have time to see us, that kind of thing. So we didn't do our first kind of round of the IVF treatment until 2018, which then didn't work as well as it could have done. But at the end of it, we only had one embryo from that round, and then they tested that, and unfortunately, that embryo did have the genetic mutation. So then in 2019 we went back into another round of it, and we were really successful with that round. We ended up with, they did something different with the drugs than me, and ended up with loads of eggs, which then obviously could create a lot more embryos. And then we were very fortunate that quite a lot of them didn't have the genetic mutation. And then so summer of 2019 we went back and had one popped back in, so to speak. And then, my daughter was born in March in 2020. So all in all, from when we first went to see the geneticist, we're talking like nearly 6 years from the very beginning. But I think we were in that exploration stage where we'd heard that PGD existed, but it had never been used for Hirschsprung's, and everyone we saw was a bit like, oh, we don't know how that had worked with Hirschsprung's because we don't know what gene it's in. Oh, let's have a look and see if we can find what gene it is. And then as soon as they found which gene it was in our family, it was kind of like, yeah, all systems go. These are your options. This is what you can do. I'd hope that if another family wanted to do the same, it would be a smoother journey, because we've kind of paved the way for that to happen now. There's no licensing to wait for or anything like that. So it would just be, I guess, the geneticists trying to make sure they know which gene it's in.
Yeah. I was going to say with that one, it may, because all in all about 6 years for you, but it might be a little bit quicker because they don't have to go through the licensing process.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, now that it may be more popular, there may be more people wanting to do it.
potentially.
So it might be six of one, half dozen of the other. I genuinely don't know.
Yeah, I
No.
don't know at the moment. I do know that I spoke earlier about a friend of mine that I know. She had a son who had Hirschsprung's, and she went to see a geneticist about that. And I know that within the year of going to first visit the geneticist, she knew it wasn't genetic. So it feels like if you get the right the right geneticist who knows about Hirschsprungs, or you get the right referral, it feels like they have a better idea of what to look for to try and decipher whether it's genetic or not. And I think that's probably the key thing. Once you know if it's genetic, and once you can identify the gene, because that's obviously key to building the test and everything else. Without knowing the gene, you just can't test the embryos. But I feel like once you've got through that bit and you've made your decision of the road you want to take, it's kind of two separate things, isn't it? There's the genetic side and finding out if it's genetic and how long that takes, and knowing what gene it's in if it is genetic. And then there's, right, what do we do with that information? And if that is something you want to go down, that's the next route. And how long does getting into that treatment kind of pathway take these days? I'd hope not as long, because, like I say, it's licensed, but then I don't know what the pressure is on the service at the moment, whether there's backlogs from COVID or anything like that. But yeah, I started thinking about it before I even knew if I wanted a baby, to be honest, because it was just one of those things that I thought, do you know what? I want to be armed with the information. If I one day do decide that we're going to have a baby together, I want to be able to say, right, we know what pathway we want to go down. Or if I never do have a child, well, at least the family now know what the gene situation is, and it helps them for their future families as well. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. Like we said, knowledge is power. But this has been a fascinating conversation. I just want to thank you so much for
no,
coming
thank you for
on,
having me.
because this is something I don't usually do, but I love doing these sort of, obviously Hirschsprung's related, but Hirschsprung's related slightly different episodes, because it gives a little bit of a different take. And I've learned an awful lot today just in the 45 minutes we've been chatting together.
Yeah,
And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on,
no,
because it's been a real eye opener.
no, thank you for letting me talk about it. And like, I just want to say, I am no expert when it comes to genes. There might be a medical professional listening who's like, oh, for God's sake, that's totally inaccurate. The way you've spoken about that is horrendous. What you've called that is awful. But it's just a personal journey that I went down, and I just, like I said to you, it's just about, I just love people to know that it's a possibility and that it exists. And it may be of no interest to some people and may be totally against what they believe in, but for some people it could be what gives them hope in then in having another child, or gives them that hope that they can think, actually, I don't have to be afraid of having another baby because I'm worried that another child will have Hirschsprungs, or I've got Hirschsprungs and it's something that's always worried me for my future family, or something like that. It's just, I hope it just gives people a bit of peace of mind that actually there are some routes you can take with a bit of knowing the right pathways, and a bit of finding the right referrals and the right geneticists. Hopefully it helps some people and gives them some answers.
Absolutely, absolutely. But like I said, thank you so much for doing this, because it's been a really, really interesting, eye-opening episode. But yes, I would
Thank
thank you
you.
so much, and obviously wish you all the very best for the future.
Thank you.